Hey guys, today I'm going to talk to you a little bit about Piaget. So in your cognitive chapter, Piaget is one of the most influential theorists in the area of child development. He talks about development in terms of cognitive development. So where Erickson, the theorist Erickson, kind of talks about development insofar as psychosocial development, Piaget is all about cognitive, okay? And he's got several different stages, and they're very age dependent. Um, so sensory motor is from 0 to 2 years old. Pre-operational is from 2 to roughly 6 or 7 years old. Concrete operational is 7 to 11 or 12 years old. And the formal operational stage is from 12 to, I want to say, 20 years old. He actually has another stage for the emerging adult, but they don't really talk about it in this particular textbook. So we're not going to go into it. Now, the thing with all these different stages is that it's all about brain development, really. So it coincides with the maturity of different areas of the brain. So, for instance, the hippocampus, which is super critical for memory, that doesn't really kick in until, or is not like well developed until roughly 6 or 7. And that cognitively is when you can really see a child's working memory start to kick in, and that leads the way to the concrete operational stage. At 0 to 2, as you read in your textbook, and maybe they talked about it in The Secret Life of the Brain a little bit, little babies are born with like tons of neurons and no real connections between those neurons. So there's a lot of dendritic growth that occurs when a baby's first born, and you've got these neurons that are reaching out and making connections with all these other neurons trying to build networks. um, that's it kind of relates to the kind of cognition you see in children in the sensory motor stage, and that's what we're going to talk about right now. I just want to say that from 0 to 2 you have tremendous dendritic growth, but at the age of 2 this really important event happens, and it's called pruning, and you probably read about it in the biosocial chapter. Pruning is when all the unnecessary connections that have been made during the sensory motor stage are removed. Think of it just like a bush, right? You've got a bush that grows and all the branches are growing all over the place and it starts to look really crazy, right? So then you go outside and you prune the branches back so it has a more uniform look. Well, it's the same thing with the brain. So from 0 to 2, you've got crazy dendritic growth, all these connections because the child is learning about its environment. But at the age of 2, you get specificity. So all the connections that haven't been used by the kid get basically are removed. Okay, so the brain gets pruned. So the infant initially is dealing with the formation of schemas, and we're going to talk about that. We're going to talk about schemas, we're going to talk about assimilation, and we're going to talk about accommodation. And I have a homework assignment for you guys to do with respect to that. But anyway, let's just get on to it. All right. So the sensory motor stage. So sensory motor. So that means the child learns through its senses, the 5 senses, and movement. Okay. They basically can only take information in through their sensory systems because initially a child can't even walk, it can't crawl. It's kind of a prisoner to its own body, right? So it looks around, it hears, it sees, it touches things, and that's how it learns learns about its environment. Initially, in the first part of sensory motor learning, we've got something called circular reactions, all right? Circular reactions mean that the child initially can only learn about things placed in its hands or in its mouths, all right? So, for instance, one of the first thing that a kid learns about is sucking, believe it or not. So the first a child gets a nipple and it gets food, right? But then maybe you put a pacifier in that child's mouth and the child learns, well, a pacifier isn't the same as a bottle. And believe it or not, that's a big thing, right? It's starting to distinguish between objects. And then maybe it puts its hand in its mouth and it sucks on that differently because the hand isn't like the pacifier, isn't like a bottle. And then maybe it puts a plastic toy in its mouth and that's different from its hand, from a bottle, from a pacifier. So initially, a kid puts everything in its mouth and this is the way it distinguishes objects in its environment, all right? It's very much just the child learning about its body and things that are directly in like the kid's hand or its mouth. Um, there's another really interesting thing that happens or that you can observe in little kids this age, and it's something called object permanence. And it's like a hallmark of the sensory motor stage that Piaget talks about. And basically, the idea is if you have a ball, okay, if you have a kid in front of you, like a 2-month-old kid, and you have a ball and you have a blanket, and you show the ball to the kid, and then you put the ball underneath the blanket, you cover up the ball with the blanket right in front of the kid so the kid can see you covering the ball with the blanket. And you say to the kid, okay, where's the ball? Where's the ball? The kid won't be able to, the kid won't be able to find it even if you put it under that blanket right in front of the kid. Because the kid, if it doesn't see an object anymore, it's like magical. It's like it's disappeared. And that's why little kids are super, super intrigued by peekaboo. So when you hide your face behind your hands, the child literally believes that you've disappeared, okay? They don't understand continuity, okay? So it's a really interesting little hallmark of children in the sensory motor stage, this object permanence. And kids achieve object permanence at around 4 to 5 months. Then they begin to understand that, oh, the object's under the blanket and they can find it, okay? That kind of signifies that they're in the second part of sensory motor. Okay, so we're going to talk right now about schemas and accommodation. So what's a schema? A schema, we all have schemas. We have schemas for a whole bunch of ideas. Like if I said to you, I want you to think about a table. All right. You could probably think about like 100 different types of tables because you have in your brain this huge area devoted to schemas for tables. And you have schemas for skies, like you might see a night sky or a sky during sunset or sunrise or a blue sky or a cloudy sky. So you have a schema for different types of skies. And if you think about it, you had to learn or begin to form these schemas at some time. Nobody's born with the notion of table or the notion of sky, right? That kind of knowledge has to be initiated at some point, and that's what babies are doing. They're building schemas for everything in the world around them. They're building schemas for girl, boy, mommy, daddy, house, toys, themselves, everything, okay? Because they're like a blank slate and they learn from their environment about they learn from their parents and stuff about their environment, right? And these schemas get established. And these are basically also the basis for language. Okay, so let me give you an idea of how a schema is formed. Let's say you've got this little baby and this little baby's never been to a farm before, okay? And you bring the kid to the farm and you show it a horse. And you tell the kid about the horse. You say, look, baby, the horse has big eyes and big ears and a beautiful mane and a beautiful tail and look at the nose, and you talk and you show the kid all the different features of a horse, okay? So then the kid starts to form a schema for horse because it's never seen a horse before. So this is the birth of a schema for horse, okay? And then maybe like a week later, you go to a horse show and there's a person on a horse and the kid looks at it and it's like, what's that? And you say, that's a horsey too. That's just somebody who's riding a horsey. So now the kid expands their schema because now they understand, oh, a horse can be ridden on by a person. Okay. And then let's say you go to a toy store and you show the kid a rocking horse, okay? And the kid sees it, it doesn't know what it is. And you say, that's a horsey too. Look at the ears, the nose are the same. It's got hoofs and 4 legs. And the kid's schema for a horse expands even more. And then the kid sees a stuffed animal for a horse, like this pink stuffed animal, okay? And the kid doesn't know what it is. And you say to the kid, yeah, that's a horsey too. Look at the ears, and you show the child how the features on the stuffed animal horse are similar to all the other horses that the kid has seen. And the kid's schema for what a horse is expands until all these different prototypes for a horse fit into this scheme. Well, that process is called assimilation. Assimilation. That's when you take objects that are similar and put them into the same schema. Like you have that schema for a table. And like I said, you may have 50 different pictures in your mind of different tables. And all of those tables were assimilated into your schema for a table. Same thing with the kid. But then what happens if you take the kid to a farm one day and this is what it sees? What's the kid going to say? Well, I'm sure all of you know that the kid's going to call the cow a horsey because it is really similar. It's on a farm. It also has 4 legs and it's fuzzy and relatively large ears and a nose like a horsey. So the kid's going to say horsey. And you say, no, that's not a horsey. That's a cow. And you start to describe the differences between a cow and a horsey. You tell it about milk. You say, look, it doesn't have a mane. Look, the tail is different. And then the kid has to develop an entirely new schema for a cow. That's accommodation. That's when the kid builds a whole new idea in its head about something in its environment. That's accommodation, okay? So now we've got 2 different schemas in our head. One for horses, and we've accommodated and made one for cows. And then as the kid learns about the world, it sees a dog, and maybe it calls the dog a cow. And you say, no, that's a doggy. And so now the kid has to build a whole new schema for dogs. It's accommodating for the dog, okay? So that's the difference between accommodation and assimilation that they talk about in your book. Assimilation is when the same kinds of items, even though they look slightly different, they're all the same. Okay, they all fall under the guise of horse. So you assimilate and those go into your schema for horse. But when an object is similar but is actually completely different, then you have to build a new schema for it and you're accommodating. Okay? And that's how your world builds. That's how a world builds. That's how you learn about everything in your environment. The child assimilates and the child accommodates and it learns about all the different stuff around it. Okay, this is a really great table that's in your book. And it kind of breaks down what's going on in the sensory motor stage that Piaget talks about. I don't expect you to know every single detail, especially in this class because it's accelerated. But if you look at the table, it's got primary circular reactions, which is about birth to roughly 4 months, secondary circular reactions, which is roughly 4 months to 12 months, and then tertiary circular reactions, which happen in the 2nd year. So from 0 to 1 months, it's really all about like sucking, grasping, staring, and listening, okay? It's reflexes, it's learning how to touch and suck on objects differently because the kid is basically accommodating for all these different objects, okay? Secondary circular reaction is when the child really starts to interact with people in the environment. So, like, they talk about something in your psychosocial chapter called synchrony, and synchrony comes into play here as well. Synchrony is the way that a caregiver or any person interacts with the child. So you look at a child and you talk to the child and you make faces at the child, and the child looks at you and it laughs. And when the kid looks at you and laughs, you look back at the kid and you laugh. And you guys start to get this communication going where you both kind of make noises at each other and you both laugh at each other. And that's synchrony. And a kid learns a lot about it, a lot from it. A child learns about the initial stages of communication with other people. It learns about facial expressions. It learns about give and take with others. And kids are really into it, right? Because they're bored, to be honest with you. They're seeking out stimulation. They really want stimulation. So when you start to talk to a kid and be expressive with a kid, that kid is going to work it. They're going to do everything in their power to keep you there with them, okay? And that's what secondary circular reactions are really all about. It's the kid being purposeful in trying to engage with you and keep that communication going. But it's also the kid doing that with objects. So a great example of secondary circular reactions in children is like, you know how they hang mobiles up in cribs? Well, a kid will kick a mobile to make it move, and usually it plays music and maybe lights will go on. And the kid will do this over and over, right? Because the kid wants to watch that. It wants to see the lights. It wants to hear the music. It wants to see the mobile spinning around. So it would do everything in its power to maintain that stimulating environment. So it will act on its environment to maintain this entertainment. This is something that the kid can't do in primary circular reactions. It doesn't have the physical capabilities, but it does in secondary circular reactions, okay? Now, in tertiary circular reactions, it goes a little bit further because now the kid, usually kids around 1 year old, can crawl. And once they start crawling, they start experimenting with their environment. So they do things in their environment to see the consequences of it, all right? That's why it's circular. They do something in the environment acts back on them, and then they do it again, and the environment acts back on them. So a great example is rolling like a truck. So if a kid's like 1 year old and you put a truck with wheels in front of the kid's going to push it, right? And the truck's going to roll. And the kid's going to keep pushing the truck and watching it roll. And it might do this 1,000,000 times. Because kids really dig seeing that their actions have consequences. They find that fascinating and enthralling. And so they try to interact with everything in their environment, including things that they shouldn't act with, right? They'll like put stuff in the toilet bowl. That's a great example, right? They see a toilet bowl, it's water, it's got a hole in it. It's seen that when it flushes the toilet, the water goes down there. So of course they're going to throw stuff down the toilet bowl. They want to see what happens. Does everything go down the toilet the same way? And they probably think about, well, where does it go? So they might like put tons of stuff in the toilet bowl. And in fact, my kids both did that. They both were throwing stuff down the toilet bowl to see, do forks go down the same as stuffed animals? Do stuffed animals go down the same as like marbles? They want to know what every little thing might do in the toilet bowl. And they do this with everything in their environment. So Piaget has a nickname for that stage. He calls kids in the tertiary circular reaction stage the little scientists, because they're like experimenting with everything in their environment. In stage 6, though, he says that children start to like consider the consequences of their actions, whereas beforehand they never did. So for instance, a kid that's closer to 2 years old might want to see how something is when you flush it down the toilet, but they realize that, oh, if I flush this down the toilet, then it's going to make a big mess. I've seen that happen before, and then mommy gets really upset. So then maybe the kid won't do it. So it starts to think about, well, the negative consequences of its actions a little bit. Okay, so those are the 6 stages of sensory motor intelligence in Piaget. I hope that helped.